Hello, I'm Nathan Bond. Welcome to Impact Factor, a seminar series that explores what research universities do, what's expected of their faculty, and what sort of changes we could expect if we became a research university. As you probably know, Texas State University was designated by the state of Texas as an emerging research university in 2012. That means that we will eventually apply to the state for full research university status. If we become a research university, we'll have an easier time attracting even better students and faculty. We borrowed the term impact factor for our series title because that term is used to measure the scholarly influence of academic journals. And research university faculty are generally required to place their publications in high impact factor rated journals. So, what would Texas State be like if it became a research university? How would things change? What would the regents expect of our faculty? This seminar series is designed to answer those questions. And to do this, we'll bring you one seminar each month during the fall semester. I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Tom Grimes, Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication, who will introduce today's seminar. Tom?
Thank you very much, Nathan. If you look at faculty at the nation's research universities, the very best of them are risk takers. They advance knowledge through their research, and they oftentimes advance that knowledge in non-traditional ways. Now, remember, the point of academic publishing is to both contribute to your discipline's theory and methodology, as well as to influence the society, of course, in which we all live. Now, with that in mind, how far can assistant and associate professors at Texas State University who want to be tenured and advance in rank, how far can they go when they publish in non-traditional venues? How much risk can an assistant or associate professor assume if he or she wants to reach wider audiences than just the audiences of narrowly focused and highly technical academic journals? When does non-traditional publishing push the bounds of what's acceptable in an academic, tenured environment? Well, I'm going to explore that question with three guests. The first of whom is Heather Joseph, the Executive Director of SPARC, an acronym that stands for Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. Now, this is an international organization composed of academic and research libraries that are devoted to creating more open methods of scholarly communication. In other words, SPARC wants to make research data and ideas available through more than just traditional peer-reviewed research journals that are printed and mailed out to a few hundred academic subscribers. Ms. Joseph joins me from her office in Washington, D.C., where SPARC has its headquarters. Your webpage states that SPARC wants to, and I'm going to quote this, wants to create a more open system of scholarly communication. Now, in your opinion, what's wrong with the system we have now? And I infer something's wrong because you want a more open system.
Sure. So, great question. I think the system that we have served us very well for hundreds of years when we were sort of reliant on a paper-based communication model. What's changed is that we have this wonderful new technology with the internet, and especially with the World Wide Web, that has allowed us to talk to each other, to share our work, to really communicate on a day-to-day basis in a very different way. And yet, the way we share our research articles and the outputs of our research still remains mired in the traditions and often case the formats of a print and paper-based world. So what we're looking to do at SPARC is to take advantage of the opportunities that the digital environment presents us to do more in terms of sharing our works faster, wider, better.
I mean, what are you talking about? Are you talking about a traditional academic journal that isn't on paper but is online. Is that what it is?
That's one form that you can certainly, you can certainly think about. Many, many, many organizations have in fact taken their print journals and transitioned them to fully web-based online publications where rather than getting your printed bound journal in the mail every week or every month, you can simply get access to the articles when you log onto your computer in the morning. You can have articles sent to you via your email stream, RSS feeds. You can get alerts that something new of interest to you in your discipline has been published on social media. The sky's the limit in terms of the different ways you can think about getting information, articles, results of research delivered to you in the online environment.
Now, is the only difference, Heather, that the technology, the quality, peer review, and all of that is the same? Is that right?
Well, I think ideally, yes. So what Spark is looking at is actually a system for communicating scholarly articles that goes under the name of open access. So our sort of vision of if we could recreate the system for how scholars and researchers share the results of their research in the digital environments, what would it look like? What would be the kind of environment that would work the best for folks who are interested in having their work reach the widest audience and having access to the widest amount of information? And certainly one component of that is utilizing traditional peer-reviewed journals, which provide a very important set of high-quality research papers to the world. And yes, when we're talking about open access journals, we're in fact talking about basically what you said earlier, which is a traditional research journal that's peer-reviewed, copy-edited, edited for scientific or scholarly veracity, and then delivered to researchers for them to use and to read.
Now, there is this tension between what you're talking about, this new technology, this new way of getting this information out, in these tradition-bound universities that are so careful about looking at the pedigree of a publication and what it takes to get into the publication to ensure high academic quality and selectivity. And I know universities, not just this one, but many universities, big R1, Research 1 universities around the country that are just not ready for this. Right? I mean, have you encountered this kind of resistance?
Well, yes. And I think one of the things that's helpful to note is that the idea of open access and the idea of online publication in general has now been around for well over a decade. So we've got some proof of concepts that have allowed us to kind of move incrementally. First, to sort of transition traditional journals using the same kind of access models and business models into the online environment. And universities, academics in all disciplines were understandably nervous. Would that transition result in any degradation of quality? Would everything be the same? And I think over the course of 5 years, 10 years, people's fears were allayed that the digital environment didn't actually have any direct effect on quality, that those systems remained in place. And that's allowed us to be a little bit more aggressive about being innovative in terms of taking down some of the barriers that are in place in the system. Barriers like having to pay a charge to get access to an article. That's an integral part of the vision of open access, is anybody, anywhere, any place can, at any time, can get access to articles without having to pay a subscription or pay-per-view fee, that the costs of publication are covered up front, and that enables the largest possible set of interested users to get access to this information. So what we're seeing is this sort of next wave of experimentation really begin to be more innovative in terms of building on the traditions and the established comfort level, if you will, in the digital environment.
Now here's my last question, then I'll let you go. What is your forecast for the future? How do you think this is going to play out and evolve?
My wish would be that, I could wave a magic wand and we'd have this perfect environment where articles, data were all freely immediately available and easily integrated, so our scholars could work in a new digital scholarly and research environment just seamlessly. I think the reality is that the future is we're going to continue to take incremental steps towards enabling that vision. Piece by piece, we'll have discipline after discipline, have first movers who are ready to experiment with new technology, new forms of digital scholarly communication. They will do the proof of concept that they're of high quality, that the sky will not fall on business models of supporting editorial quality controls and the quality mechanisms that we rely on in the academy. And that when that happens, ideally, we'll see universities, tenure committees, funders being willing to not only accept, but encourage innovative digital open forms of scholarship as the new norm in how we share the results of our work on our campuses.
Heather Joseph, Executive Director of Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for taking time out and do this. I appreciate it. Cindy Royal is an associate professor of journalism and mass communication at Texas State University. Cindy is one of the nation's acknowledged experts in the sociology and use of digital media. She's spoken at the invitation of Research One universities around the United States, and she has just returned from a year-long fellowship at Stanford University. Joe Kotarba is a professor of sociology and director of the Center for Social Inquiry at Texas State University. His research focus is in a fascinating area, the sociology of everyday life. Professor Kotarba is the author of 7 books and 90+ scholarly articles. His latest book, Baby Boomer Rock and Roll Fans, The Music That Never Ends, was published last year by Rowman and Littlefield Press. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to make a statement, no question here, and I just want you to react to the statement. I was a faculty member at the University of Wisconsin-Madison before I ended up at Texas State University, and when we went through tenure and promotion exercises up there, everybody had to meet a certain set of standards, 12 publications in impact factor rated journals of 2.0 or higher, and if you know anything about impact factor, that's pretty high in the social sciences. It had to be very narrowly focused programmatic research that tells a story. I did this and I discovered that, and then I did another research project and I found this out, and so on and so forth. And what was interesting about that was that would just qualify you for consideration for tenure and promotion. It wouldn't get you tenure and promotion. To get tenure and promotion, according to one of my colleagues at UW-Madison, you needed that, what he called, that academic je ne sais quoi, that ineffable thing that gives your research pop, interest, that tugs at the reader, that brings them into your area of inquiry. That is what will get you tenure at UW-Madison. Now, what do you think about that? Cindy?
In our area, journalism and mass communication, I think there are very specific things that we would want to be looking for. That would be that specialness, something that would be new or innovative, moving into a new area, something that's very relevant to the future of the discipline. And so I think it's important to be able to look for that. But at the same time, the person that's seeking tenure needs to understand that that's part of the process and might need to have some mentorship around that to help them as they're going through the process craft what they're working on, and then be very specific about what the specialness is or what they needed to add, why theirs should be different than somebody else's. And so I think that needs to be articulated in the process, even though you can't quite articulate what that specialness is.
Well, je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, I do not know. But you need to be able to get that understanding in the process that that's expected of them, and maybe point to certain examples of where people have done that. So you can't just leave it to the person, I think, necessarily for them to be able to move into that realm unless you're specific about it.
Well, Joe, do you want to take a crack at trying to define that je ne sais quoi? What is that special thing that you think we ought to look for?
Well, it could be any number of things in a way that you can locate many different places in the work and career of a scholar. I think what's really interesting is here at Texas State University, we're in a situation where we're in a growth pattern. We're moving more and more towards higher status in terms of research. Our research profile is getting to be really good, really nationwide. And so what happens as you move up, the baseline standards tend to go up too. And so you need a certain number of publications, not nearly what would be required perhaps at places like Wisconsin or Stanford or University of California, but still our baseline standards for meeting what it takes to be identified as a sociologist keep going up, and that's good. It's a good direction for young scholars to be pointed to, because that's where they're going to do their best work eventually. But in terms of the je ne sais quoi, that could come out of the work per se, that could come out of the publications that you've done, but also given that we're a fairly integrated faculty here in terms of teaching, service, and research, it can come other places too. So you can be a sparkling teacher and really motivate students and enlighten them. And that can feed into your overall package, if you will, of being a scholar. And I think we take that into consideration.
Yep, here is a Cindy Royal specialty, and I want you to elaborate on this, and that is finding ways to tell your story that not only influence and reach the academic audience, but also everyone else. Tell me about that, how you do that, because you do that.
Well, this is very relevant in the digital media area, the area in which I study and teach, to be able to participate online, either through my own website or blog, or to use other online venues to be able to get ideas shared with the community. So there are certain venues that I've used, Neiman Journalism Lab or PBS Media Shift, that have been very receptive to new ideas. They're very good venues for getting the ideas out early, and it may be part of an ecosystem or a process where you start thinking about things and you get it out into the community, you get responses from people, and then you work it into other types of research studies. The benefit of that is that your work gets out there, more people know about it, you become part of this community of scholars that are also sharing that kind of information, and it just becomes an important part of developing your positioning in the industry and what we've called a brand, personal branding. And I think it works very well for academics in our field, and I think there are probably ways that we could talk about it for other fields.
I'm inferring, Joe, that you did a little of this in this book here. This isn't a dry academic treatise. I mean, look at the title, Baby Boomers Rock and Roll Fans, the music that never ends. There's something else to this than just the academic component of it, right?
What that book represents or illustrates is a certain specialty area in sociology known as ethnography, but also participant observation. And increasingly in my discipline, the use of your own experience as a source of data understanding is appreciated. The broader pattern in the social sciences, though, is that, excuse me, it used to be that in sociology, for example, there were 3 or 4 major journals where you get your high-rated publications. That's gone. The discipline is very widespread. It's fragmented insofar as that there are many subspecialties in sociology. So there's a large number of specialty journals that you want to publish in because you have a very specific audience
Well,
to
what
appreciate
happened?
that.
What made those 3 or 4 de rigueur, now that we're speaking French here, those 3 or 4 de rigueur journals, what broke that up and made it as eclectic as it now is?
I think it's the growth of the discipline, the growth of academia in general. Because the message that we're giving our junior scholars and our students is that there are a number of ways to analyze, to study, but especially to write about society. And so when you give those kinds of options to scholars and budding scholars, you need to provide the audiences for them to evaluate the quality
Well,
of
that's
them.
exactly what you're doing, right? I mean, you're going into physical venues, well, I don't know, physical, digital venues that do exactly what Joe's talking about, right?
Right. I mean, these particular venues have their own standards. It's not maybe the same as a peer-reviewed type standard, and they would be accepting different kinds of things, like maybe an idea for a work at its very early stage. But it gets an audience that's very broad and very interested in the kind of
Well, no,
work
that's
that you're
exactly
doing.
right.
You know, and I should add too that using social media to be able to spread that word is very important. So something like Facebook or Twitter, when you're able to get on a site like that and talk about what you're doing, point to different things, whether it's your own website, your own blog, or one of these other venues, that at least gets people talking about your work and engaged with it. And then when they see you in a journal, then they're more interested in reading it because they're familiar with your work and your background.
Right. Well, I brought this up with Heather a moment ago when we did her first, and that is there's a risk involved in going outside this strict academic confine to reach other people, is there not?
I don't view it as a risk. I view it as part of what we do. And I think it may be because our discipline in mass communication is used to reaching out and connecting. Because I study digital media, it's a very natural progression of that area to be able to share what I'm doing. So it's almost like I'm practicing what I'm teaching. I teach students about developing a personal brand, so why don't I try this out myself and see if I can develop a personal brand using all these different venues and what benefit that's given to me. And you mentioned the Stanford Fellowship, and I would not have received that Stanford Fellowship had the people on that review committee who accepted the people into the fellowship had they not known about my work previously through social media. I met someone who introduced herself to me as someone who followed me on Twitter, and she was the associate director of the program, and from that I was able to get the opportunity to go to Stanford. So wonderful opportunities can come out of sharing in this kind of a community setting.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We're back with Cindy Royal, Associate Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication at Texas State University, and Joseph Kotarba, Professor of Sociology at Texas State University and author of a new book, Baby Boomer Rock and Roll Fans, The Music That Never Ends. We're hawking the book today,
Great.
if you don't mind, and I'm sure you don't. What do you think about what Cindy said before the break? Well, let me put it a little bit different. If I were an untenured assistant professor and I wanted to get out of the strict, rigid confines of academic journals, and I came to you and I said, Professor Kotarba, what are the risks and rewards of doing such a thing? What would you tell that untenured assistant professor?
I would tell that untenured assistant professor to aim primarily and initially towards the highest quality journals in sociology or related disciplines that he or she could. The reason is that my feelings about what's good work and what are appropriate outlets are not going to necessarily be shared by all the colleagues that are going to review somebody's materials for tenure or promotion. And so you really need to establish your identity as a sociologist first. And you do that by having your peers acknowledge that you are a qualified sociologist in your specialty. But what the other thing I would say to that person is, but don't think that you only have to go towards 2 or 3 or 4 specific journals. What you want to do is to get, again, to the highest quality journal you can, but you also want to keep in mind that we are under increasing obligation in the social sciences to take our research, to take our findings and our ideas, and to share them with the real world, the lay world. And so it's less and less an issue of pinpoint referee journals versus non-referee journals or lay publications. Increasingly, it's best to do both, because good research is good research, but your audience is really what's changing increasingly.
Mm-hmm. Cindy, you and I have talked in your office about pushing the academy to accept new venues for scholarship and to get used to the fact that we don't just patronize 4 or 5 journals and talk among ourselves, that we've got to reach out, right? I mean, there is a little bit in what you do of being edgy and pushy in helping the academy understand why this is important.
Well, I agree with what Joe just said about you have to be publishing in both areas. You have to not ignore one at the expense of the other. Yeah. And whether it's at the beginning where you're coming up with the idea and you want to share that and get some feedback and input from the community, or if it's at the end where you're just sharing your results, being able to use all these tools like social media and other online publications are great ways to do that. But also, media in our area is changing very rapidly. It's very important that we understand that there are new ways to look at things. There may be new methods that we have to explore. And the only way we can really push that envelope is by seeking other venues. The time to publish in an area like digital media where things change very rapidly. If you have to wait for more than a year to see something in print, it becomes really irrelevant. Yeah, it's a historic piece, which is fine for the historic nature of it, but it's not necessarily something that's going to be helping the discipline. So when you're working on something that requires immediate feedback or immediate acceptance by the discipline, you probably need to look for venues that are going to apply that more quickly. There are some academic journals that are working on improving that and finding new models for being able to get research out more quickly, but there are other ways, and I think, at least in my area, it's just constantly pushing the envelope of thinking about ways that I can share what I'm doing so people know that I'm down here doing it.
Well, you know, this is not just a Joe Katarba, Cindy Royal idea. I mean, you look at these, what are these, 10, 20 some odd criteria for faculty who qualify as Tier 1 faculty in a state of Texas Tier 1 institution. In our application to become eventually a Tier 1 institution, those who are going to evaluate us want to see faculty who might have some of these attributes, such as somebody who's a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, a Pulitzer Prize winner, someone who has won the National Endowment for Humanities fellowships, the American Academy of Sciences, the Nobel Prize. Now look, I mean, this is, what this is, these are people who go off the grid a little bit. I mean, they do something spectacular, unusual, and they push and they get stuff that pulls people in, and it's been codified in these stodgy names like the Newberry Library Long-Term Fellows, but that's what it is, right?
Well, to some degree, yes, but again, you're talking about the real creme de la creme, if you will, of acknowledgement of quality by people who are not necessarily in your discipline. Very important, but on the one hand, if we had to live up to those criteria at Texas State University, I don't know how many of us would be left. But what we're doing, I think, is in a positive sense, working towards making it clear that these kinds of acknowledgments and honors are extremely important to acknowledge as an individual scholar, but also to put into your repertoire as an intellectual. And I want to stress that word intellectual because I think it's coming very much back into fashion to be an intellectual, not just a researcher.
You're absolutely right. She and I have talked a lot about this.
And so to be an intellectual means learning to do the kinds of things that intellectuals have done for centuries, and that is how to take your specialized knowledge and and communicating it to various audiences and to let them know in their language how important your findings really are.
Yeah.
And for junior faculty, what I like to mentor them to do are things like, if they publish a book, go out there and do some readings at the public library or the bookstore or things like that, because that's where you are forced to make sure that what you're saying makes good common sense to the people that you also need to impress.
Yeah. Now, I don't know whether you will wear the mantle of public intellectual or not, but you and I have talked about this. And I mean, is it fair to say you would like to be or are a public intellectual? And if that is the case, what is that?
Well, I would like for people to be aware of the work that I'm doing publicly, so if that's what you mean by public intellectual, because it not only benefits the researcher and the intellectual, but it benefits our university and it benefits our students because people are paying attention to what we're doing. If you are active in the community, whether it's with other professional organizations or professional groups, as well as academic groups, then you're providing avenues for your students to be able to have success in the future.
Well,
so it's all part of a big ecosystem that it's not as discrete as this is my teaching and this is my research and I can only do it in these few boxes here. It's part of like a bigger system that we should all be actively a part of.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the big benefits of holding a Sterling professorship at Yale. That gives you that wide, expansive, boundary breaking permission to do anything you want to do.
And I've even gone as far as suggesting to our lecturers and adjuncts that if they have something to say, they should try publishing in some of these online venues, even their own blogs, because that also brings attention to our university and it brings attention to the kind of work that we're doing.
Right, exactly.
In our discipline, we're moving, and I agree completely with all this. I think you're spot on. In our discipline, we're paying more and more attention to things like what we call public sociology, and where we systematically talk about ways to translate what we find and what we analyze into ways that are comfortable for our audiences out there, because that's how we're going to impress them. That's how we're going to help them change things.
Let me ask you this. This is not a smart aleck question. I really do mean this. Why do you care? I mean, why don't you just publish? Why do you care whether there is a larger constituency? Because you're going to be here whether there is or isn't.
Let me give you at least two answers, from my perspective. One of which is the university increasingly requires you to do that. We call that service. And that means you go out and you do things away from the strict, narrow academic things that are of benefit to the broader community. But on the other hand, it's fun. When I do a book reading on my baby boomer book and I go in front of 35 people my age or maybe even older, and I talk about that research, it's something that they can identify with, but then they can hear, well, that's a little bit different way to think about how we grew up with rock and roll music. And so I can get my sociological message across to them at the same time.
I see.
And I would agree, I can't help myself from doing this. This is the area that I teach and research in. I want to use these venues. I couldn't stop doing this if I wanted to. It's an extension of what I do to be able to communicate and share the work that I'm doing and the successes that my students are having and the trends that are going on in our discipline.
You know, you're absolutely dead right. Now this is a terrible thing to say, but at Wisconsin-Madison, the faculty used to talk about 140 IQ idiots. And what they meant by that are these people who are so regimented and so enclosed in the academic environment that they don't think expansively enough. And we at UW-Madison do not want those people on our faculty. And so I guess that ethic has reached Texas State University as well.
Well, you know, what's really nice about being at Texas State is we're creating those traditions that the Yales and the Harvards are trying to live up to. And so that gives us a lot of freedom because we're able to meet changing standards and criteria in other disciplines and in the rest of the lay world. But it also gives us a chance to to experiment with different kinds of approaches to our work. And because the bottom line is, if you can publish your work in good journals that are appropriate for your work and your audience, it's appreciated here, very much so.
We need to wrap it up. Any final comments, thoughts?
I mean, I just think this is the world we live in. There's so much different type of media out there that we should take advantage of it as much as we possibly can, and we should constantly be experimenting and pushing with ways that we can share with what we're doing and our successes.
Perfect. Cindy Royal, thank you so much for consenting to be on the broadcast. Joe Katarba, Department of Sociology, and your wonderful book and books and scholarly articles. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
and
you, Tom.
thank you for joining us. See you next time.